we need a voice at the table advising us, and we don't have that right now. So I know that Ms. Johnson and I, Councilwoman Mamie Johnson and I have talked about this, and we need to work on that.
I'll echo what the Councilwoman has just said. As I stated earlier, we need to have the young people at the table. In fact, I'm also the local chapter president for NOBLE, which is the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. And that is something that we have recently started having very deep conversations about, to the point where we are in the process of setting up a program where we can actually bring young people in to sit at the table with us to discuss issues and come out with resolutions, because without those young opinions, we don't have everybody's opinion. And that's something that we have definitely come to realize.
We created a student representative to the school board position. That's been one thing I would like to see that on council, I'd like to see that on planning commission, housing authority boards. I think the more that we can provide opportunities for young people to be engaged at the policy making level is important. But I would also say that I think that what you all are doing right now is what we need. You reached out to us, you set the agenda, you're asking the questions, you're setting the tone of the conversation. And so I think having more young people who are willing to engage at that level not only helps to rally your peers, it definitely has an impact on us.
Thank you. Myles, move to the next question.
Okay. So the next question was, what kind of training or lessons can young Black men, or should young Black men need to know in order to stay alive at times like these?
Well, I can throw a couple of cents worth into that. Speaking as a police officer, as an African-American father, and also from my position with NOBLE, I have the talk with my children about how to conduct yourselves in certain situations. Some people say, well, why would you do that? I said, because it's a reality. It's the world we live in. If I don't expose it to them myself, then when they have contact with someone, how are they going to know? We at NOBLE are even doing a program which is called The Law in You. And basically what that is it's a very strictly designed program which focuses on involvement with police officers, or it can actually work for anybody in a certain type of situation of authority. And basically it gives you guidelines. It tells you about your rights and your privileges and everything else. So I think that one of the biggest things is education. And there are so many places you can get that from, but I think that it's up to us to make sure that we are educated when it comes to these matters.
I'd like to add on to what the Assistant Chief is talking about. I think one of the biggest things for African-American males to understand, and for people in general, is perception is reality. And, you know, students will say to me all the time, well, that's not fair, or it shouldn't be that way. Well, whether it's fair or whether it should be a way is irrelevant, right? People deal with their perception of an incident in a moment. And I think one of the things that you have to understand as a young Black male is you have to understand history. You got to understand Emmett Till, Trayvon Martin, you got to understand George Floyd, and you got to understand the things that have transpired in America. You have to understand and have an awareness of your surrounding. And you have to be able to, in a moment, understand when a situation has gotten beyond you. And, you know, you say, hey, I'm in this situation and it's time to shut up, do whatever, and then we'll let it play out later. But I think this idea that, hey, what you're doing to me is not fair. What you're doing to me is not right. And deciding that you're gonna, you know, you gotta pick your battles and you gotta decide how you're gonna fight the war, how you're gonna fight the battle. And sometimes the best answer right now is let's retreat and then let's go get a good defense team and then let's come back and we'll mount our attack later. And I think that's one of the big things that as young Black males, you gotta understand there are times when the right thing to do or the safe thing to do or the prudent thing to do is I'm going to retreat right now. And I'm going to allow this thing to, I'm going to lose this battle, but I'm going to win the war because I'm going to go get my, defense team together, and then we're going to go reattack this at a later point. But I think you need history, and you need to understand perception and reality, and understand that people act on their perceptions, and you've got to have a consciousness of that.
So I support what both have said. I just like to offer a little bit different perspective just from my own experience. So as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Virginia Beach, and we typically I was the only one on the baseball team that was Black. We had very few African Americans involved in certain things. And so what I appreciate the talk that my father had with me was look people in the eye and walk around like you own the place. So I think that there is this reality, since the question was, how do we survive? But I also believe that we've got to carry ourselves and encourage our young people to act like they belong and look people in the eye, being courteous and polite, and knowing what the rules of engagement are. I agree with you 100% on that. I don't care who you're dealing with. Whether you're dealing with one another or you're dealing with people in authority. But I think too often we allow these perceptions of our young people to permeate, and then we put the burden on the child to know how to react. I think the burden and responsibility needs to be on the adult and the authority figure for them to understand how to work with young people, because we all know young people's brains are still growing. I think we put entirely too much burden and pressure on Black males or others to try to figure out how they should handle a situation. I think adults have to step up and take a look at how we handle situations as well.
Thank you. And adding on to the last question about what young people could do, Ms. Hester said that we could register to vote, make sure that we complete the census, and she encouraged people to ask the panelists questions, and also to pay attention to the city council dockets. Myles, would you like to ask the next question?
Okay, the next question is, as a teacher in a school with far smaller African-American student population than when I taught at Norview, race discussions have been difficult to say the least. One of the greatest issues this year will be the Black Lives Matter movement versus the police department. Mr. Howard, how can I accurately describe the position of police officers with regard to the movement? How can I convince my students that they can support both groups?
I'm sorry, you were breaking up some. Could you repeat that?
How can I accurately describe the position of police officers with regard to the movement? How can I convince my students that they can support both groups?
Well, I think we have to understand the fact that even police officers are humans. And I'm sure everybody's heard it before. I don't care what profession you're talking about. There are going to be some people that are not the cream of the crop, for lack of a better term. There are going to be people who work outside the lines. And I think it's important for us to, number one, to be able to see the difference between the uniform and the person without the uniform. And if we can just talk and communicate, I think that things will come to light. Things are brought into a totally different perspective. Because when you start talking, you start finding out things about people that you never would know. And I think it puts us in a position where we are able to personalize versus generalize. And I think for me, when I talk to people, I like to get my own opinion of them based on how they are with me, as far as how they treat me, how they speak to me. And I think there needs to be more of that, especially on the law enforcement side. Historically, police officers have been, alpha personalities. And I think that we need to do a better job of trying to be understanding, showing compassion and empathy. But I think that those who are not police officers also need to give each individual an opportunity to show them who they are.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. We have another question. Hold on a second, let me pull it up. This one again is directed more towards Howard, but anyone could chime in on this if they want to. What are some other actions carried? Well, this one's directed towards everyone. What are some actions that are being carried out by local governments to remove systemic roadblocks to wealth building for underrepresented minorities?
Hey, Eric, can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry, my bad. What are some other actions being carried out by local government to remove systemic roadblocks to wealth building for underrepresented minorities?
So at the city level, we, about 2 years ago, brought on a position, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, who reports to the city manager, and we're specifically focusing on procurement in the city, workforce development, and looking at all city policies to create inclusionary opportunities. We have a long way to go, though. But there's definitely, in terms of small business, creating more opportunities to grow small business, whether it's access to capital, helping support folks as they're creating business plans, and ensuring that when we have contracts for big projects here in the city, that we are including our local businesses and specifically providing additional opportunity for training and acknowledgement and awareness within our communities of color.
A lot of wealth creation, at least in our country right now, derives from home ownership as well as business ownership, as Councilwoman McClellan said. One of the things that I'm continuing to advocate for our city and cities across the country is to halt the practice of concentrating subsidized housing in African-American neighborhoods. We need to have a fair share housing policy, both within the city and within our region, that then allows for housing values to grow, and that's where wealth can be accumulated. I used to be very actively involved with the Hampton Roads Committee of 200 Plus Men. The organization still does a lot of work with young people around trying to open doors and training around stock and finances and things of those type. At one time, there was a coalition of Black investors. I think there's some other groups out there now that do that. And I saw as one of the viewers on this panel, Mr. Grady Dunn, who's involved with the Alpha fraternity here in Norfolk. And I know that they have taken on creating some special initiatives under some youth programming that they've been doing to also provide pathways and opportunities for youth. So I think the question was around government. I think government can definitely do a lot in the areas of procurement, but I also think the village as a whole can be very much involved to help create these pathways as well.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Jeffrey has a question from the audience.
All right, so I have a question from an anonymous audience member. Is more directed towards Mr. Jordan. So what impact could giving technology to lower income communities and people of more impoverished backgrounds have?
So I have spent my life doing that. And by chance, my mother, who started the computer science department, she was a math professor at Norfolk State and helped start the computer science there, taught me that. So there's a great deal that needs to be done. Councilwoman McClellan and I had just talked about that earlier this week in terms of having digital inclusion strategies that provide technology in the hands of all individuals. The talent that you all are showing right now on this Zoom call is the same talent that could be going into the latest app that could make you a billionaire and that could make us all billionaires if we invest in you. So I think there has to be intentionality around our policies and actions to make sure that we provide devices and provide broadband access. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, has several initiatives that they're trying to put forward. Congressman Bobby Scott is involved with some initiatives that he is also advancing, as well as Senators Warner and Senator Kane. So I think having that youth voice, once again, being involved in these decisions that our elected officials are involved in, can go a long way with helping to make sure that we understand what the needs are and then provide them. And then one of the initiatives that I've been involved with is not only putting technology in the hands of young people, but giving you all the wherewithal then to work collaboratively on apps, on solving various solutions. And to, I think, Andrew McClellan's credit, the city of Norfolk has really opened up and created a lot of open source opportunities that I think that some talented young people, such as yourselves, can get involved in with the right equipment to really help the city solve a lot of the challenges that it faces. But broadband should be treated like a utility, and we need to be very intentional about making sure that all of our children have access to the technology, because you all know the homework that you get requires you to do great research and a lot of involvement on the internet. And those that don't have that equipment and don't have that access are at a disadvantage. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but it's just additional hurdles they have to overcome.
I have to give a shout out to Norview High School that you all have done a great job of with the Congressional App Challenge and encouraging folks to create apps. And I hope that tradition continues, whether it's through the LCSE program or Commander Littlejohn or whomever. And we really need to grow that actually throughout the whole Norfolk public school system. I think that, both at middle school and high school level, that's a great way for folks to create apps and go to DC and be recognized at the national level. There's really something there. So.
Thank you. Myles, you have a question now?
Yes, there's a question. Anyone could answer this. What do you think should be done to deal with officers who are responsible for police brutality? How should cases be handled, and what can be done to prevent them from happening in the future?
So if I understood you correctly, you're saying what should happen to officers responsible for brutality?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
They should be fired. They should be fired. They should be dealt with criminally. And I say that with my entire heart. There is a difference between making a mistake and doing something that's just completely wrong. And I feel very, very passionate about that, not only with the officers we have here with the Norfolk Police Department, but across the country. Because someone said earlier, perception is reality. When one police officer in a uniform, no matter where it is, does something wrong, we all look bad. So I don't want those people on my department, and I don't want those people serving my communities, plain and simple.
Hear, hear.
Moving on, I have another question from an anonymous viewer. This is more towards COVID-19. What is the Norfolk government doing to reduce the homeless population, and how are they aiding the homeless population in times of COVID-19?
I can take this one on. So we have received CARES Act funding. You all might have hearing about that in the paper. The challenge is the municipalities, the cities and the counties. The way it's working is that money actually, if you are a city that's less than 500,000 in population, and Norfolk, by the way, is a little under 250,000, that money has to go through the state, and then the state has to disperse that to the localities. We had our first tranche of money awarded to us about 2 months ago, and that was $21.5 million. And there will be a second tranche of money, but we don't know how much that's going to be and when it's coming. And that money specifically has to be used for expenses that weren't in the budget previously, one-time expenses, and it has to be expended by the end of the calendar year. And so we've taken, I apologize, I don't know the exact figure specific to homelessness, but it's homelessness. There's a portion of our funds going to that. So we're working with our CSB, our Community Services Board, as well as other local community organizations like 4Kids and others to deal with homelessness. And we actually have 2 hotels that we've taken over in the city of Norfolk, where we are providing rooms for folks who are experiencing homelessness right now. And we're using that CARES Act funding for that. And we also have teams going out to do testing and free testing to ensure people get that COVID testing as well. Trying to keep people from being homeless to begin with on the eviction side is also, we're providing money specifically for that to try and keep people in their homes. And I don't know if you saw that Governor Northam got it through the Supreme Court of Virginia today that eviction moratorium is going to extend now, I think, until September 7th, if I read that correctly. But you know, that's great. That moratorium's great, except it still gets to the question of what happens when that moratorium ends and people still have to pay that rent and they still don't have jobs. There's a whole underlying issue about unemployment. But getting back to homelessness, yes, we've been very active out in the streets and working with the local church community and trying to ensure people have housing and that they also have medical care as well.
Thank you, Ms. McClellan. Now Jeffrey has a question from the audience.
All right, so this is a question more directed towards Officer Howard. So they asked, what is one big misconception about the police force that you wish people understood?
For me personally, I think the biggest misconception is something I related about earlier, and that is that, again, when one person does something wrong, that we're all bad. I think it's very important to look at the man or the woman underneath the uniform and get to know a little bit about them to be able to form an educated opinion. And I think that's probably the one thing that I wish was a little bit different. But at the same time, I have to say, I do understand why it is.
Thank you. Myles, do you have a question?
Yes, this question is directed towards Commander Littlejohn. It says, how do you feel that the Dodson Scholars Program that you direct at Norview High School has helped the Black community?
I would say, you know, the weird thing about the Dodson Scholar Program, or the unique thing about it, is people have to understand the history of it. You know, in the year 2000, Norview High School, Dr. Anna Dodson wanted to give out a scholarship to an African-American male. She just wanted somebody who had at least a 3.0. Norview said, we'll take your money, but we didn't have a guy with a 3.0 in the whole graduating class. 400 students graduated, not a single Black male with a 3.0. So they went back to her and said, hey, what about a 2.8? She said, sure, if you got a kid with a 2.8, I'll take him. We didn't have a kid with a 2.8. So she said, well, give me your highest graduating African-American male. That year, the highest GPA was a 2.25. African-American male at Norview High School, the highest GPA was a 2.25. Last year, we had over 30 Black guys graduate with over a 3.0. And so I think that, you know, when you look at that particular program, what it's done is it's made it okay for a person to be a Black male, intelligent. You can also be an athlete. You can be like Eric. You can be a varsity basketball player with a 3.9 GPA, good SAT scores. But I think the whole idea was, we don't want to be, just like the police force, we don't want to be defined by one guy. You know, we want to say, hey, as Black males, we cover the spectrum. And I think that what the Dodson Scholar Program has done and is doing is it's making it acceptable and okay for a man of color at Norview High School to be more than just an athlete or more than just a cool guy. You can be a student, you can be a scholar, and ultimately we're creating a different set of opportunities and a different set of life outcomes. And I think that those outcomes are making our freshmen and the new people that come in through the community aware that, hey, Myles went to MIT, why can't I go? So-and-so went to Hampton, why can't I go? so-and-so went to the shipyard, so-and-so became a police officer, you know, and I think what it's done is it's created hope within the Norview community, and it's created a vision that, hey, there are no limitations. My limitation is my vision. If I have a goal to go do something, there's somebody who's gone to Norview before me that has achieved what I'm trying to achieve. And all I got to do is look for those mentors, have those conversations, and those opportunities will be available for me. And I think that's what the Dodson Scholar Program is about. And I think that's what it's been able to achieve over the last few years.
Yeah, and I would just add, Ms. Hester would like to make sure that I let folks know that Dr. Anna Dodson passed away this week.
Man.
And so a great tribute, I believe, in her honor is doing just what Commander Littlejohn said, and having more and more students that she decided she wanted to invest in years ago qualify as Dodson Scholars and continue to excel as Dodson Scholars.
That's very unfortunate. Moving on to the next question. This question is more for everyone, but could be more towards the educators. How should microaggression and other racial biases be handled in school and colleges, especially PWIs? Also, how should we go about increasing the number of students of color in STEM, and how can anti-racist sentiments in the field be reduced?
I'll address a part of that. You know, my background, I'm a nuclear engineer by training. I spent my whole professional career in the Navy nuclear power industry. When I joined that industry, there were 2,000 officers in my career field, 25 blacks, and I knew all 25. When I retired 20 years later, we were up to 48, and I knew all 48. And you know, I think part of the issue, and it happens today. My middle son, going into his junior year of high school, he had straight A's, and he brought me home a prospective schedule of classes. His guidance counselor says to him, "Man, you had the highest average in geometry in the school, or in algebra 2 in the school," but his guidance counselor was not going to program him for math. Hey, you had an A in biology, you had an A in chemistry, but they hadn't intended to put him in physics. They presumed, I don't know why they made the presumption that STEM wasn't his thing, or that being college bound wasn't his thing. And so I think a big part of it is, as you know, there needs to be reform in education from the perspective of people understanding the biases that exist, the microaggression, and how those things are handled. But also this idea, you know, Norfolk always talks about we want to be able to, you know, provide educational opportunities to everyone. And we got to go in with that open mind and understand that some people are late bloomers, some people bloom immediately. And I have students all the time that tell me, hey, I plan on going to college, and they say, but I'm done with math. Or they'll say, I plan on going to college and I don't need to take any more science. Well, there's a difference between being qualified to graduate high school and being competitive for an engineering program and so on and so forth. And I think that's the big disconnect. You know, we need to be doing a better job as educators of helping students understand this concept of options. And here's my last point. My last point is this. People always argue that, I argue that the student who's undecided is the student that needs to do the best academically. And what I mean by that is, if you decide I want to be a garbage man and you're qualified to be a doctor, you can always become a garbage man. But if you decide you want to be a doctor by the time you're a senior, but all along you were thinking about, I don't know what I want to do. Well, if you stop taking math, if you stop taking science, and you stop taking all of those courses, then you've sort of delayed your ability, or you eliminated your ability to have those options. And so I think part of what we need to do in terms of enhancing and incentivizing both students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and minorities into going into STEM is, we need to look at what is the baseline education we're providing. You know, we shouldn't get to the point where you're no longer taking math, where you're no longer taking science, because students do change their mind. They do change their goals. And all of a sudden, if we say all you need was geometry and all you need was blank, now that student feels like those options are no longer available to them. And so to me, it's about programming students so that when they graduate, they can choose from a smorgasbord of opportunities and not 3 opportunities, because as a freshman or a sophomore or early in their junior year, they got derailed from opportunities in STEM.
Yeah, and I like to jump on that and say I agree with Commander Littlejohn 100%. As he was telling that story, I mentioned to you all earlier, my mother was a math professor. When I was in 10th grade, I was told I didn't need to take math. I have an older brother who's 3 years ahead of me. He had the same experience. So this issue is systemic, and we need to deal with it. But I also would like to give a shout out to our historically Black colleges and universities. We had a lot of conversation earlier about the Ivy League schools. HBCUs have been providing opportunities for African-American males and women and white males in STEM for decades. Norfolk State has its Denemis program and has been doing outreach with Norview, Booker T, and high schools from around the region for years. Virginia State, Hampton. So I would encourage that we also make sure, as my father used to say, it's really about exposure. And so to the extent that we can expose young people at an early age to STEM, police officers are involved in STEM. STEM is in just about every career that we have now. And I think to the extent that we can make that connection between all these career opportunities and all these business opportunities and the role that STEM plays, that's one way of growing the pipeline. And that is not in any way to diminish liberal arts and all the other programs that are out there. But we definitely need a stronger pathway in more students to, especially students of color, to choose STEM. And I think that exposure piece is very important, and that school counselor is very important. Many of us in the neighborhood will talk to our neighbors and talk to children and check their schedules. So parents and those of us that know better, you can check the schedule of your neighbor's child if they'll allow it, and make sure that we don't have this continuing pattern of African-American students, especially African-American males, being discouraged from the math and sciences, which, as Commander Littlejohn says, then derails them or finds them, if they do get into college, having to remediate at the freshman and sophomore level when they could be already excelling in their coursework.
So last thing to add to this, right now, like me, myself, I've been a part of 2 programs, SES Student Scholars, and right now I'm doing Interface Edge, which is a bridge program for MIT. And these programs, they especially help students of lower socioeconomic status or students of color get acclimated to STEM in higher education. There was a statistic from Noonan that I forgot about. I forgot what was the exact number, but it was like a bunch of students of color. They go into college thinking they're going to go into a field of STEM or a major of STEM, and then within their sophomore year, almost like 3/4 of them drop out and go and switch to another field. Not that like any other field is easier or per se than STEM, but they drop out of the STEM field because they can't handle the rigor when it comes to college. And so I think there are some programs, like I just got done with a physics final like 2 hours ago, that helps you like get acclimated to college level STEM. Mr. Jordan, he put down a link that I'm going to send to everyone. It's called the National Institute for Mathematics and Applied Sciences. I'm going to put it in the chat just so that everyone can get exposed to different programs that can help students of color get used to the field of STEM so they're not discouraged. And just one last thing, I think also getting more students of color into STEM fields, what also has to happen is we need more teachers, faculty, and in STEM fields. Like there's some majors at MIT where not a lot of the faculty are faculty of color, and I know for me personally, it's kind of discouraged. There is kind of like it kind of imposes this stigma that okay, like I'm trying to work my way through this major, but it doesn't seem like there's any people who look like me who are teaching me this topic. And so I think getting more teachers of color into STEM fields also will go a long way in getting more students of color in STEM.
Hey, Myles, can I add something too? Also, I think one of the other things is once students get on a college campus, you know, there are organizations like the National Society of Black Engineers. There's a whole bunch of support organizations, and that's the key, right? The key is experiential learning and mentorship, you know, and making sure that at the high school level that we're providing students with experiential learning opportunities. Because again, people say, why should I major in math? I don't even know what you can do with that. Well, we need to get you internships and job shadow opportunities so that you can, two things, you can see people of color who have STEM degrees and are practicing in the STEM field, you know, and like, for example, we talked about the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. They've got a really great program where they run a mentoring program on Saturdays. And what shocked me the first time I went to the thing was there were 30 Black men in the room. Everybody had at least a master's degree. And I would argue that of the 30, 25 of them were physics, math, engineering. And it shocked me. I mean, we were in Norfolk, you know, and you think that there aren't a lot of men of color with those degrees, but the number of doctors and dentists and engineers that were in that room just blew me away. And I really think it's about connecting students with those mentors so that you can see that there are people like you who've done this and can give you some insight into how to get there.
Thank you. And this is going to be the last question. I didn't mean to hold everyone out till 6 o'clock, but from the audience, another anonymous member, she wants to ask about African-American women. She says, it's more, what is the educators doing for Black females? The program, she says that the programs for Black men are great, but she would like more representative for Black females as they go through teen pregnancy and other issues. So if anyone would like to speak on the education of Black women.
Well, I was hoping that Ms. Hester might reconnect, but I would say that the issue raised is very true. I think that we have to do a much better job of paying attention to our Black girls, our African American girls, and beyond just from the perspective of being preventive in terms of pregnancy and that type, but being very proactive in our high expectations for our Black girls to excel and succeed, just as we give attention, or at least give lip service to our Black males. I'm the father of 2 Black girls, and I think that is critically important that we not lose sight of that. There's more and more research and data that's coming out that our Black girls are also being disproportionately involved with suspensions and find themselves on the negative side of interactions with the police department. So I think we need to be, intentional in our support for Black girls, just as we work to be intentional about our support for Black males. I just posted in the chat window about Black Girls Code. I know Assistant Chief Howard can talk about some of the initiatives that the police department, Norfolk Police Department, has underway in terms of support for Black girls. Good friend Sonia Mooring Smith has been doing the FAT conference for years. She's been engaging Black girls. Treasurer Hester is a Delta. My mother was an AKA. Sororities for years have been involved in that work. So again, I think it's a matter of exposure and connectivity, just as Commander Littlejohn mentioned, the connectivity that he had with Grady Dunn in the Alphas.
And that was the other thing I was going to say. You know, when you look at the historically Black sororities, again, we got local chapters here that are very engaged and active in the local community. And really, to me, it's about making those connections. And I think that the solution for the African-American male and African-American female is really the same. It's about the village. It's about the village coming together and connecting our youth with mentors and with people who've done what you've done and who can give you that insight, and students reaching out and asking those questions and holding the adults accountable. you know, the Dawson Scholars didn't just appear out of nowhere. The seniors do projects every year, and they've always asked, African-American females in particular, have always asked, when can we get a Dawson Scholar equivalent of the for females? You know, we've got a large Hispanic population, and it's really about students forcing the adults to understand that there's a need for this service. And I think a lot of times there's a perception that there is no need. You know, we look and we go, well, hey, there's 5 Black girls in the top 20 of the class. But, you know, we forget that, well, what about those other 30 at the bottom, you know? And so I really think it's a matter of students really forcing us to continue this dialogue and holding the adults accountable and responsible for building that infrastructure and doing those introductions and getting those job shadow opportunities made available so that we're serving everybody across the board, you know, independent of race, independent of gender, independent of socioeconomic status. We need to be providing those services for everyone.
I'm going to put a plug in, Rodney. If you remember our days in Virginia Beach, we had a job shadow thing I did with the Commonwealth's attorney once, an opportunity to hook students up at middle school and high school level with leaders in the community one day in the school year. I think we should try and implement that in the city of Norfolk, because I think people need to see to see folks and have the opportunity to live a day in the life. And Commander Littlejohn, what you said earlier is so important, and that is you can't just prepare for this your senior year of high school. So to the extent that we can have more in the middle schools, and what I would ask is for all of you folks who are in high school now, you know, are you mentoring folks in the middle school? Are you reaching back behind you to pull people up and show what you're doing? And I think that's another really important element too. So.
Thank you. I'm going to let Jeff conclude this, have a little bit of some finishing words, but before I let him conclude, I wanted to drop my email just in case anyone would like to contact me or have any questions. But Jeff, you can go conclude the meeting.
Okay, so thank you to everyone who attended this forum, this discussion. We hope that all of you came out with this discussion with something you didn't know or have a new understanding of something, because we're all here to have different perspectives, but at the end of the day, we're all human, and we all want better for the human race. We don't want to quarrel, we don't want to bicker, we don't want to have to fight all the time. And we want to build a future where this does not have to continue to happen to get results. So thank you everyone for attending, and this is the end of this discussion.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.
Bravo.
Great job, gentlemen.
You did a great job. Let us know when the next one is.
Absolutely.
Thank you.